that's going to be pretty big. But I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent and I forgot your question.
Well, what happens if it fails?
Oh, if it fails. Okay, so if it gets less than 47%, if it gets 46, 45, 44, I'm quite nervous about that, because then the national storyline is that legalization fails by a landslide, and that there was this moment in 2010 when we thought that marijuana was going to be legal, that cannabis was about to become legal, and now that storyline is no more. And we're back in the dark ages, and the storyline could be that the pendulum is now swinging the other way. We were here once before. We were here in the late 70s, right before the Reagan Revolution. Everybody thought that cannabis was going to be legal in the late 70s. And, I mean, I wasn't really around. I was just being born, but so I hear. They all thought it was going to be legal. And then the Reagan Revolution started and turned the clock back to the worst dark ages for drug policy reform we've ever seen. There were a number of incidences that led to that, but we're not immune to that happening again. And that's why we really need to seize this opportunity, because the window might just be open for a short period of time. We don't know. Something that's very different about where it is now as opposed to where it was in the late 70s is in the late 70s you didn't have a big movement. You didn't have millions of dollars being spent every year fighting for this change. You didn't have hundreds of thousands of people as donating members. You also didn't have an industry built up around it that was very vested in the policies changing. And you also didn't have two generations of people that know that the hype is nonsense, right? You only had one generation then. Now we have two. We have people from then and the people from now that know that cannabis is not some big evil weed. So when you add all that up, I believe that we may be at a time where it's not going to, the pendulum isn't going to swing back. But who knows? It could. Could.
Do you have much faith in the growth of fledgling things like Proposition Z or the Grasshopper Lounge coming out of Oakland to spread?
Measure Z, yeah. I mean, I think Measure Z was, one of the first. Well, Seattle was first with Initiative 98 or 89, I believe it was, which was the first lowest law enforcement priority initiative to pass. And then Oakland did Measure Z, and then we did the same thing in Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, one of the other Santas, and Ann Arbor did it. There's like 15 cities across the country that we've done these lowest law enforcement priority initiatives, and they've succeeded. Measure Z goes the furthest of all of them, and actually says, look, you're gonna allow for a lot more than.
Have you been to the Grasshopper Lounge?
I have not.
Oh, you gotta go.
I have heard about it. My opinion is that may be dancing on the edge a little too much. I think we need to. It used to be that we needed to use a lot. I think something shifted recently. Now that we're sort of on the march, back when we didn't have any political power and when things weren't moving in our direction, the only way you can get noticed is by committing civil disobedience, is by going out there and sort of sticking it to the man, holding protests, civil disobedience. I remember one of the first things I did was help orchestrate somebody in a wheelchair consuming cannabis in a congressman's office. Right? We wouldn't do that today. Why? Because we don't need to wheel somebody into an office to consume cannabis to get news coverage or to get a meeting. We've got the political clout to get those meetings, just by calling up and saying we're a legitimate political force, come meet with us, right? So I think that there's a point at which activism becomes sort of prideful and just sort of like, I'm going to be irreverent, right? When irreverence and shock value is valuable, you do it. And when it ceases to be valuable, you don't. And I think we're at a point now where pushing the envelope, in most instances, is probably not the best approach. I think the best approach now is to really kind of work on the inside. Might as well work within the structures now to make change happen. If we were being shut out of all of that, well, then you have no choice but to do things like march in the street and you know, commit civil disobedience. And we were there, and thank God it worked well enough, or something changed. I don't know if we caused it, or you know, sometimes things happen and we didn't cause it at all. But we've got political power now, so you know, we should act differently as a result, and I think that's happening. I think you're seeing that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have. That's not necessarily an answer to the grasshopper or whatever, but I'm just a little wary of things that are, you know, so far beyond what the...
Well, they didn't open until 4 years after legislation. I don't feel like they're that radical or obstinate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know much about it, but...
What is it?
You can buy marijuana from a store that is legally operated, that is unregulated, without a medical ID, but simply a state ID. It's in Oakland. It's called the Grasshopper Lounge. They have a website. It's in a kind of dark part of town, and it's like an anonymous red brick building, and you put your ID through a mail slot, so that's kind of sketchy.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like that. I'll keep my mouth. Yeah.
So first and foremost, I feel that Prop 19 has already achieved its greatest objective, and that's the symbolic representation of what it's done, you know, like being on the ballot in the first place.
Amen.
To get everybody talking about the issue and whatnot. Realistically though, Prop 19's, one of the biggest problems is if it does pass, I mean, number one, obviously the DEA has already expressed interest in any commercial cultivation going on in the state, as specifically in the East Bay. But what happens when everybody gets caught with marijuana outside the border of California, and they say, okay, it all came from California, it's legal out there, you know, like, here we are on the East Coast, the Midwest, and people are getting caught with large quantities of pot, and they're pointing their fingers to us. What's the federal government going to do, and how are they going to respond to such a situation when there are very draconian laws that exist everywhere else?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting, I mean, we're going to get to, hopefully we get to have a ringside seat to all that. I don't know. I mean, your guess is as good as mine as to how they're going to react to it. I don't know.
I think they'll shut
but
everybody down.
But we got to remember that that's what everybody said about Prop 215. Mm-hmm. That's what everybody said about medical cannabis. Was all the same arguments that are being used right now about how the federal government's going to respond, and about how all the challenges about going over the border and all that. I mean, all of that, all those same arguments were made about medical cannabis. And look at us. That's not stopping medical cannabis laws from passing. It's not stopping this industry from moving forward. Can we expect the same storyline to happen with this? I don't know. But it's possible. And I think to some degree, it's really hard to put toothpaste back into a tube. You know, and this engine is moving, and it's moving fast. Now, especially with the business side of it. One of the reasons I moved into the business side is I said, wow, if you can make freedom profitable, freedom's going to happen fast, right? And that's what's essentially happening right now, is people who could care less about whether people are in prison or not are out to make a buck, and in the process, they're supporting justice and freedom. Great. If I can find a way to trick people into caring about people, sign me up. How can I utilize people's self-interest to achieve a good in the world?
It's their free market.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, it's sort of the perfect libertarian sort of thing. I mean, in this industry, I definitely talk to people all the time who are just like, they see an opportunity to make a buck, and they're out making it on this new industry. And some of them don't care about whether or not you know, people are in prison, or, you know, they don't have a care for justice bone in their body. But their work, if I can do anything about it, is going to somehow support the change in the laws. So we'll host an event and I'll say, look, it's $500 to go, you have to be there. Everybody in the industry is going to be there. What's the money go towards? Changing the law, you know, and then they show up and I say, great job, you helped so many good people, you know what I mean? It's like, it's all the same. It doesn't matter why somebody does something, the important thing is that they do it, you know? So, it's one of the reasons I'm on this side of it, because I think we can make more of a difference through the business side at this point than we can through the political side. Because if we can get more and more people vested in the end of marijuana prohibition, the faster it's going to happen. Yep.
This should probably be our last question.
But how are the laws going to be as far as like driving under the influence and what that means? With alcohol, you have tests and you have the blood level and whatever, but like in marijuana, where like, you know, these things stay in the body a lot longer than the actual effect is. How are they actually going to legislate that? That's awesome.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting way to do it. I mean, there are already impairment tests, really scientifically valid impairment tests that test for all impairment. Like, it doesn't actually matter what's in your system. What matters is whether or not you're impaired. What matters is your reaction time affected, is your judgment affected, and there are now scientifically valid tests that do this. And I think we should see a change in the laws that say, look, if you're impaired, it doesn't matter if you're impaired because you're tired, if you're impaired because you're angry, if you're impaired because you've taken too much Benadryl, if you're angry because you were putting on, or if you're impaired because you were putting on your makeup or talking on your phone or drinking too much or smoking too much cannabis, right? It moves it to this individual level where it's like, are you impaired? Not what's in your system, but rather, are you impaired? And if we were to move to that level, I think we'll see, you know, I think cannabis might move us to that way of testing drivers, in part because it's difficult to measure, you know, based on how much is in the blood. But there are ways to do that too. It's just getting them to be commercially viable is a bit of a challenge to get a test of current cannabis impairment that's actually related to cannabis itself. There is a way to do it. Getting that to be commercially viable is a bit of a challenge, but believe me, if we change the law, that's a great, so you want to think of a great ancillary business, figure out a commercially viable way to test for current impairment of THC. That's a multi-billion-dollar idea, right? I'm sure people are working on it right now as we speak. I'm just not an expert on that area, but there is viable tests for current impairment now. We could use those tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.